What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to We the People podcast. My name is Brett Maurer, and this is another addition to the Greek mythology portion of our page. Now, I also, as I'm recording this, am processing a video that's going to upload probably right before this. And that video covers the birth of some of the other remaining Olympians. And the video I'm doing now, I wanted to talk about some of the stories of those Olympians before I move on in the timeline of the history. So I wanted to tell two stories today, and I may, depending on the time, even record another one. But the stories that I wanted to tell today, one is the story of Hera and Io, and the other, if I can find the right note page right now, is here it is, the story of Athena and Arachne. So those are the stories that I want to discuss today. So the first story, like I said, is about Hera and Io. As you know, Hera is the queen of Olympus. She was married to Zeus and ruled over Olympus with her beauty, but also her very jealous temper. Um, Zeus himself was not afraid of anything, but it said the one thing he did fear was the fits of rage that the fits of rage that his wife's temper would bring on. She was a very jealous wife, like I said, and she hated all of Zeus's other wives. And when Zeus first asked her to be his wife, she refused because she didn't feel the need to share him, I guess, is the way I would look about it. And Zeus would create thunderstorms, change himself into birds and monsters, and pretend to be in distress. And he would basically fly into Hera's arms for protection because Hera kind of loved and surrounded herself with birds. And then, as she would cuddle this bird or this small creature or whatever, she would suddenly find herself holding Zeus as he changed back into his form. And so then that was when Zeus kind of won her over. And they married, and it's said that all of nature burst into bloom. And Mother Earth, Mother Gaia, gave Hera a tree. It was an apple tree, and it bore little golden apples of immortality. And this is not the only form of mythology that involves a tree in this sense. The golden apples of immortality that grow here are seen different ways by different interpreters. Some say these apples are apples of immortality and, lifelong youth, and others say that these apples brought immortality in the idea that your mind reached a point where it itself was immortal because it had learned so much. They were basically apples of divine knowledge. And the Norse mythology, there are aspects of this in the Babylonian mythology. There were ideas like this, and it said that due to obviously all of our original common ancestors, and maybe even due to the original civilization that was Mesopotamia, that all religions have blossomed from this single different story points, just like there's always a flood, there's some origin, there's some kind of, excuse me, some kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Doomsday event. Most mythologies have some kind of sacred tree that bestows knowledge or some kind of divine gift. And that even goes into the modern religions, basing themselves off of the Bible or the Quran, or, other sacred texts. And so Hera got her tree. Hera got this sacred tree with beautiful golden apples. And she treasured this beautiful tree that grew beautiful fruit. Once again, she was a goddess of divine beauty. Okay. And so she planted it in the garden of Hesperides. And this was a garden that was tended to by nymphs and spirits. And these were actually the children of the Titan Atlas, who became, obviously, Atlas that holds up the sky from the earth. And so Hera plants her tree in this garden, and this was her secret garden. And with this secret garden, a lot of times comparisons here are drawn to the Garden of Eden, the gardens of Babylon. There are many, many different parts of other religions that kind of, once again, tie into this. And so in this garden, Hera plants her tree. It's, a secret garden that she and the nymphs know of. And to guard the tree, she places a 100-headed dragon. And she orders that the 3 nymphs water it and care for the tree. Now, just to add a little information, this 100-headed dragon is something that will become extremely important later on. And the reason it becomes important later on is because it will have something to do with a person that most of the modern world knows as Hercules. But anyway, she guards this tree with a 100-headed dragon and orders the nymphs to care for it and basically bring it to fruition. Zeus loved Hera very much, but we all know that he was greatly, greatly fond of other women also. And with that, it was not so uncommon for Zeus to sneak down disguised as, a mortal man, disguised as an animal, or even disguised simply as like a brush of wind, or so he had a lot of wives and a lot of girlfriends and a lot of, for lack of a better term, baby mamas. The more wives he had, the more children obviously he had, and that was the kind of founding of Greek heroes and Greek royalty. But Hera was obviously very jealous. She did not like these other wives or the other children, and there was nothing Zeus could do to stop her when she got mad. And so she knew just how tricky Zeus would be in order to get a new wife or create new children. And so she always kept a heavy eye on him. Well, the way this story goes is that one day Hera was watching Earth and she saw a thundercloud. And there were no clouds in the sky, there was no other storm clouds around. So she knew that this, little random thundercloud in the middle of nothing had to be Zeus. So she rushed down to the earth and darted into this cloud. And inside this cloud was Zeus. And with him was this little snow white cow. And for those who don't know, Zeus, his symbol was the eagle. But he was also known to be somehow involved with cows and other animals. And so there was this little pure white, beautiful cow with Zeus. He had seen Hera coming from the sky and decided to protect his newest bride, who was Io, by changing her into a cow. But sadly, this cow was just as beautiful as Io had been. And so, Hera, who was not stupid, pretended like she suspected nothing and begged Zeus to give her the cow rather, as a gift. It was a beautiful cow. And the queen, being as beautiful as she was, when there was something beautiful and she wanted it, how could Zeus deny that to her? So Zeus gave her her wish and gave her the cow. He gave her Io. And Hera, being cruel as she was, and knowing full well that that was not an actual cow, tied the cow to the tree in the garden and sent her servant Argus to keep watch over her. Now, Argus was a creature that had 100 bright eyes all over his body. He was so strong that he was the one who single-handedly killed Echidna, who was the mother of monsters. They then came up with a plan. Hera told him to watch over the tree, watch over the cow, don't let anything happen to him. And he was her faithful servant. And he was the best warrior and watchman she had. And due to him having all these eyes, he never had to close more than half of them. So he would sleep and only half of his eyes would close. And then the other half would open and the other half would close. Well, the way that this story goes is that Argus would sit down and simply watch the cow. And poor Io had to eat grass and walk around on 4 legs. And she would sit and just stare up at Olympus through her big cow eyes. And Zeus was so afraid to tell Hera that he turned his newest bride into a cow that he just decided not to. And finally, after a time, Zeus became so sad having to see Io in distress that he came to Hermes. Now, as I discuss in my other video, Hermes was a very mischievous, crafty, tricky god. And so he came up with a plan with Hermes to run down and set her free. So, Hermes disguises himself as a shepherd. And he walks up to Argus, who is once again in this hidden garden, and plays a tune on his shepherd's pipe. Now, Argus was already bored. All he'd been doing is sitting watching a cow and a tree. So he was glad to have the company of the random shepherd, and he was pleasantly enjoying the music. So Hermes, in disguise, sat down beside him, and after he played for a while, he changed the tune, and the tune became very dull and long and soft. And the story that accompanied this song was also long and dull and boring. It had no beginning, and it went on and on and on and on, and no end. So Argus then goes to sleep. Of course, only half of his eyes close. So then Hermes continues to drag the story on and on and on. And finally, the final 50 eyes close shut one by one. Then quickly, after all 100 eyes were closed, Hermes touched each and every eye on Argus's body with his magic wand, and then they were forever closed in eternal sleep. And it was at that moment that Argus had been literally bored to death. So then Hermes unties the cow, and Io runs home to her father. Her father was a river god. Okay, her father was a river god by the name of Inkanos. And he did not obviously recognize this cow as being his daughter. And of course, Io couldn't say anything to him because she was a cow. She couldn't speak. So instead, she scratched her name into the riverbank with her hoof, spelling out her name, I-O. And it was then that her father understood what happened. So he rises from the riverbed, and he rushes off for Olympus to take revenge against Zeus. He charged Zeus with so much rage that to save himself, Zeus had to throw a thunderbolt, and he killed the river god. And ever since, the bed of the river Inkanos in Arcadia has remained dry because Zeus killed the river god. Hera, obviously, was furious because not only did the cow, who she knew was Io, been set free, but also Argus was dead. So, once again, being the jealous, angry person Hera was, she sends a stinging fly to chase Io and to sting Io. And to be sure that Argus's memory would never be forgotten, she took all of his eyes off of his body and placed them on the tail of her favorite bird, and this bird became known as the peacock. The eyes obviously could no longer see, as Argus had been killed, but they looked beautiful. And they went from the tip of the tail all the way to the body of the peacock. And this went into the peacock's head. And thus the peacock became just as vain as the god who loved it. And that is how a peacock got the eyes on its tail. Now Io, who is still a cow, was pursued by this stinging fly all over Greece. She jumped over rivers. She went from country to country trying to escape this stinging bug. She then jumped across the strait that separates Europe from Asia Minor. And ever since, it has been called the Bosporus, or the Cow Ford. And then the bug chased her all the way to Egypt. And when the Egyptians saw this beautiful snow-white cow, it is said that they fell to their knees and worshipped her. and she became an Egyptian goddess. After that, Hera permitted Zeus to turn her back into her human shape because she could no longer live with people worshipping Io. But Zeus made her agree that she would no longer torment her. And Hera made him agree that he would never look at Io again. And so Zeus turned her back into a human, and Io lived as a queen of Egypt, or a goddess of Egypt, and the son she bore to Zeus became a king of Egypt after her. And eventually her descendants returned to Greece as great kings and beautiful queens. So in the end, her sufferings for having been the wife of Zeus were not necessarily in vain. But this is the story that those who believed Greek mythology, this is kind of the origin story that they said, and this is how the Egyptians spawned from us. And now this story is kind of controversial, because obviously the Egyptian mythology has its own set of gods and deities and goddesses and things like that. And so with having these two civilizations been prosperous around the same time as each other, and they share a lot of foods and things like that due to the region they come from, there is a lot of argument sometimes. One of the arguments we always talk about in my household, with my family being part Syrian and Lebanese, is about baklava. Growing up, there were always the people who talked about the dessert baklava that they would get at Greek restaurants. But Greek baklava and the Lebanese baklava that my family has made for generations is completely different. And so there was always kind of a question as to, well, who did it first? And, that is the conversation that happens around Greek mythology and Egyptian mythology and even the culture. Who did it first? And in this story, those who interpreted Greek mythology at the time simply said, we did it first, and we brought Egypt their gods. Now, I don't pretend to believe that that is true. I don't necessarily believe that that's true at all. I feel the Egyptians have their gods and the Greeks had their gods, and though there are similarities that may have spawned from a parent religion, they are unique and their own belief system. But nonetheless, this is an argument that is never ending and probably will never actually have a definitive answer. So that's one of my favorite stories about Hera, and kind of a good example of her jealousy. The next story I wanted to tell is about Athena. Okay, and this is a story about Athena and Arachne, and basically how spiders came into being. So Athena had a constant companion, and that was Nike. Okay, Nike was the spirit of victory. Now, for those of you who are probably going, interesting, considering the Nike brand for a long time used something along those lines of spirit of victory or something like that as their campaign slogan. This is why. This is the origin. So, her constant companion was the spirit of victory, Nike. And with Nike at her side, Athena would once again, as I said in a prior video, lead armies and teach them battle strategy and things. And so even if Ares himself was in a battle, those armies could not withstand the ones led by Athena. And Athena would lead armies, but only the ones that fought for just causes. In times of peace, she would stand by and guide the artists of Greece. And it's said that she is the one that taught them how to create fine and beautiful art. She was a very prideful person, but not in a negative way. She had great pride in her own skill, but she was always happy to see others excel. The only request that she had was that if you did excel and you were her pupil, that you gave her the proper respect as a teacher that is deserved. Well, one of her pupils was a simple country girl by the name of Arachne. Arachne was an incredibly skilled craftsman, and she was incredible on a loom. People would come from all across Greece to admire her beautiful weavings, and she would boast ignorantly that she had not learned anything from Athena, but it was all natural talent and that she was herself better than the goddess. Now that hurt Athena's pride a little bit. And it was then that Athena decided to disguise herself. So, disguised as an old woman, she went to Arachne and tried to speak to her and talk sense to her. And it is said the way the story goes is that Athena compliments her work and says that it is beautiful, but then questions why she compares herself with the gods. And is she not content to be the best craftsman among the mortals? And Arachne, with her nose in the air, replied, "Let the goddess Athena herself challenge me, measure her skill against mine." And so Athena throws off the disguise and says, "So be it. Sit down and let's have at it." Because Athena was not one to back away from a competition or a challenge. And so Athena wove what is considered to have been the most beautiful tapestry ever seen. Every single thread and knot was so perfect, and the colors contrasted and complemented perfectly, and bits of shimmer and sparkle came from the tapestry, and it was said to be so breathtaking that one would die if they looked upon it for too long. And this was a tapestry that showed all of the Olympian gods in all of their glory. Now, Arachne's tapestry was also beautiful. Athena herself did admit that the girl's craftsmanship was flawless. But she was confused as to what kind of picture was woven. And then it was then explained that it was a scene making fun of Zeus and his wives and how he comes about them. And so in wrath, at the poor treatment of her father, the goddess tore the tapestry to shreds. And then she put a curse upon Arachne. Immediately, Arachne began to shrink, almost to nothing. Her fingers turned into long, spindly legs, and her head shrunk down to the size of a pinhead, and she was then a spider. Athena had turned Arachne into a spider and told her that she may spin her thread and weave on an empty net forever. Athena was a just goddess, but she could be stern. And she knew that the gods were great only as long as they were properly worshipped by their subjects. Athena was very fond of craftsmen, but she demanded her respect, and Arachne refused to give the respect that was deserved. And so she was punished and turned into a spider And ever since, Arachne and her descendants have woven their beautiful nets, but they do not hold any splendor among mortals. Another story about Athena is how Athens came into being. Athena, once again, was very fond of Greece. And she was also very fond of the people of Greece, for she felt that they had the ability to reach great knowledge and wisdom. And of course, she was the goddess of wisdom. But Poseidon was also very fond of Greece. Poseidon was very fond of many things, but Greece, for some reason, enchanted him. And so, there was a city, a small, beautiful city that was beginning to take form. And Athena and Poseidon both laid claim to it. And after a long fight, they decided that the one who could give the best gift that the citizens loved would have the city. And so the two gods mounted the Acropolis, which was the flat-topped rock that sat at the top of the city, and the citizens followed them. It is said then that Poseidon struck the cliff with his trident, and up came a spring. And the people marveled at this, but when they tasted the water, it was just as salty as the sea. And thus, it was decided that that spring was not useful for them. So then Athena gave her gift. She planted an olive tree in the crevice on a rock. This was the first olive tree the people had ever seen. And Athena's gift was judged the better because it gave the people food, gave the people oil, and it gave the people wood. And so the people named the city hers, and thus named it Athens. And on the Acropolis, where this challenge was held, they built a temple for Athena. This is the temple we know today as the Parthenon. And here, Athena watched over Athens and her city with her owl, the wisest of all birds, sitting perfectly on her shoulder, watching over the city and guiding. And under the leadership of Athena, Athens grew famous for their art, for their crafts, for their wisdom and knowledge, politics, and even for the strength of their armies. And so that's the two stories I wanted to tell for today. And there are so many other stories that I'm going to get to. I haven't even yet discussed Poseidon's child. Poseidon had many children, but there's one in particular that everybody knows, and that is Orion. And I'm going to do a podcast on Orion. Either one will be posted later today, or that will come in the following week. So be on the lookout for that, the story of Orion, as well as the story of how Apollo came to be the speaker with the Oracle of Delphi. And then after that, we're going to move on down the line of Greek mythology. We will discuss the story of Persephone and Hades. After discussing Persephone and Hades, we will talk about Dionysus. He is the last Olympian god that I have not yet discussed. And then I want to talk about the creation of man, creation of Pandora, the Great Flood, and then the repopulation of the earth. And then after that, we get to talk about the stuff everybody wants to talk about. And I think everybody wants to hear the stories of the heroes of Greek mythology. So we have a few more stories to get through, um, and I will do different stories on other people too. There's, stories surrounding different gods like Pan. There's stories about Echo, who was a nymph spirit. There's stories about Selene, the moon, Helios, who was the sun. So there's a lot of stories, many that I haven't covered yet, but we're going to slowly but surely work our way through them and get where we're going. So, everybody, make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. Um, Make sure you're all staying healthy, stay safe. If there's a specific story that you want me to tell and you want me to research it a little more, please, 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 please reach out to me. Let me know. Make sure you're on the lookout for other content that's coming. There's going to be a video or two, at least, on a figure from Black history, and there's also going to be a video coming out on um, eventually some Norse mythology once we start getting through the Greek. So, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. Enjoy the rest of your week or your weekend at whatever point you're listening to this video. Stay safe, stay healthy, and I'll see everybody next time.